everyone, and welcome once again to Killershrewfan's Killer Toy Reviews. It's that time of year again, my friends. The changing leaves are rattling in the wind of a cool breeze, the nights are growing longer, and jack-o'-lanterns are lighting up porches. That's right, it's Halloween, and as All Hallows Eve approaches, it brings with it another season of Killershrewfan's Spooktacular Toy Reviews. For anyone new to my channel, this series celebrates the Halloween season by taking a look at any piece in my collection with a little extra horror to it. Monstrous models, creepy carcasses, off-putting oddities, anything to put that good old spooky tingle in your bones. This year, I'll be taking a look at 3 models in a lead up to the 31st. A smaller lineup than last year to be sure, but I had a harder time scrounging up applicable figures this time around. Sure, there were the likes of Nanmu's bestial Mordred release this year, alongside... oh god. But I always try to avoid buying figures for the sole purpose of reviews. I prefer to buy stuff that I want outside of YouTube. That being said, hopefully these 3 videos can be quality over quantity. We're going to start things off with something that might be a bit of a stretch for some people, but with its stylized sculpt and downright hellish color scheme making it look as much demon as dinosaur, it's a figure I think will be right at home in the month of October. Plus, if you were a Stegosaurus back in the Morrison formation, I imagine it would be pretty scary to encounter one of these in a dark alley. I'm speaking of course of REBOR's recent Saurophaganax Maximus, aka Notorious B.I.G. Gotta love those nicknames. And at a whopping 16 inches or 47 centimeters long in a straight measurement and roughly 5 inches or 12.5 centimeters off the ground, it is a fitting title indeed. With size estimates ranging from 34 to an insane 43 feet in length for the animal. That would put this figure at anywhere between 125 to 132 scale depending on which estimates you adhere to. Of course, more known material would be helpful in this regard, but what can we do? But about the model, REBOR released this in the early months of 2022 with the usual paint variants, and it actually took me a while to get my hands on any of the 3 for a very simple reason. Whereas I quite liked the unique sculpt of the figure, none of the paint jobs sat right with me for reasons I'll touch briefly upon later. I did eventually warm, no pun intended, to the volcanic variant, given my affinity for warm tones on dinosaurs, and the fact that it put me in mind of Smaug, the best character of a bad situation if you ask me, did help. I mean, hey, they both have teeth like swords and claws like spears, so I think it's a fitting comparison. Plus, by the time I eventually got on board with this color scheme, one popped up for cheap on the secondhand market and I snatched it up. I guess hemming and hawing over which paint job was the lesser of 3 evils worked out for me in the end, the trade-off being he didn't come with his original packaging, so no box to cover in this video. Let's just get into the figure itself. So starting off at the head of this Saurophaganax, or Allosaurus Maximus if you prefer, that's a pretty gnarly looking head sculpt, complete with pronounced lacrimals and craggles of uneven raised relief scales framing the orbit and running down onto the fringes of the jaw. The rest of the face is adorned in smaller, flatter scales, and you'll see that there is a bit of shrink wrapping going on, particularly on the antorbitals, but on such an otherwise stylized sculpt, it's not necessarily an eyesore by any means. The eyes are peeked out in a glowing yellow and feature a black slit, which I do think is a bit of a silly feature on such a large predator. But I suppose it aids in the threatening appearance, so there you go. Like most of REBOR's sculpts, this figure lacks extraoral tissue, with the teeth jutting out along the oral margin. They're cast in the usual semi-translucent plastic REBOR is fond of using to help give them that enamel look, which I quite enjoy. The jaw is articulated and opens nice and easy to reveal a wide pink tongue and fleshy pseudo-cheeks. Moving down the body, you can see some nice bunches of skin forming on the right of the neck with the slight turn of the figure's head, while the skin on the opposite side stretches tighter over the curve. There's still plenty of striation and scale detail carved into the skin, and you can see how it all sags with gravity to create more horizontal wrinkles above the gullet and throat, which sports a row of small spines. Plated rows of osteoderms run down the back of the neck and onto the body, which has been adorned in a crosshatch texture of leathery skin and scales. I don't know that it's quite as well done as the skin work on last year's Carnotaurus, and it's certainly not as subtle as the great work on the recent Kiss and Tusk, but there's something about it that feels at home on this design. The movement of the skin, particularly how it sags around the gut and stretches and buckles with the movement of the limbs, is handled nicely enough. You can also see the ribcage jutting through the torso there, and again, this would be problematic on a more quote-unquote scientific figure, but I think it adds to the more monstrous look of this particular Saurophaganax. Moving on to the long and robust tail, I was honestly surprised how big this figure turned out to be, and a lot of that is thanks to the tail, which seems to stretch into next week. The osteoderms continue down the length of it, and you can see all these vertical wrinkles and striations adorning the flexing muscles and tendons beneath the skin. The legs look quite powerful with rippling thighs, bulging calves, sturdy ankles, and large feet. They're not really clown feet, mind you, but they are a more roided up take on the agile feet you'd see on a more naturalistic interpretation. One detail I really like is the addition of the plate scales that adorn the front and back of the thighs, as well as studding different parts of the thighs and ankles. The black coloration really gives them the look of hardened lava stones atop the running red magma of the skin, perhaps another reason I felt the volcanic variant was the most successful color scheme on this sculpt. The same armor detail is present on the long, powerful arms of the figure, and I particularly like the design in the overlap on the shoulders there. Meanwhile, the claws are a jet black glossy color, just like with the toes, and I will say I do wish they had exaggerated either the curvature or size of the first claw. The lengths feel a bit samey for my taste on an Allosaurid. Let's do a quick flyover of the back of the figure so you can get a look at the rows of osteoderms and plate armor adorning the dorsal region of the animal. And now a quick once-over of the underside where you can see all the skin gathering in the throat, as well as a very interesting armor treatment on the underbelly consisting of keeled scales somewhat reminiscent of the design present on the Jurassic Park T-Rex. As far as the pose goes, you can see that the Saurophaganax is sculpted with a wide gait while the head turns slightly over the right shoulder. You do get 3 additional points of articulation on the model aside from the jaw, and that includes both arms, which can rotate forward and back. These do tend to pop out on mine, but they're easy enough to reinstall. Then of course the hefty tail is cast in a soft plastic around a bendable wire, so you're able to twist and pose that however you'd like. It feels pretty sturdy too, but I like to keep the movements on these to a minimum just to avoid paint cracks. Either way, those 4 points of movement can really give you a dynamic range of posing options, taking the figure from a simple, relaxed, ambling posture to a more standoffish or even aggressive attack stance. So that's the sculpt of this thing. We then come to perhaps the most disappointing aspect of the piece, that being the paint job. Now don't get it twisted, I do like this color scheme. It's primarily vibrant reds transitioning to oranges and yellows along the flank and underside, with black highlights sprinkled throughout. It's a really fitting design for a quote-unquote volcanic variant, like I said. The black scales do give the appearance of hardened lava flow broken up by veins beneath, but it does feel a bit too saturated for my liking, almost like bad barbecue. That and the black stripe on the neck has a very distracting application. For one thing, it terminates very suddenly, and for another, it feels a bit too straight in terms of its application. It doesn't move with the flesh of the animal, which does make it look like a slapped-on bar of color. That is a mild complaint in the grand scheme of things, but it's compounded by the fact that I really wasn't taken by any of the color schemes on this otherwise cool sculpt. I personally had hopes for a Jurassic World style color scheme or a Walking with Dinosaurs paint job. You'd think with a name like Notorious B.I.G, a Big Al paint job would be a no-brainer, and that probably would have sold like hotcakes. On one hand, I do respect REBOR for not going after the lowest hanging fruit, but they really didn't give me anything I immediately gravitated towards instead. I did like the iguana green of the jungle paint job, and the black ringtail was a nice touch, but the pale face just clashed horribly with the body in my opinion. Meanwhile, the metallic highlights of the Badland variant were quite unique, and I liked the yellow interior of the mouth, but the base tones of the body? I mean, there's no way to say it without sounding juvenile. That is just a diarrhea colored toy. I hate to say it. Like I always say, a bad sculpt can be saved by good paint, while bad paint can let down a good sculpt. And I really don't feel any of these paint jobs carried this sculpt to the finish line. This variant did manage to limp its way onto my shelves, but I don't know, maybe if I got my hands on the other two in the future, my mind would be changed, but that's only gonna happen if I can get them at a discount. Meantime, maybe REBOR will roll out some other variants more in line with what it is I'm after. Now let's get into some comparisons. I don't have a ton of stuff at my disposal at the moment, a lot of it's in storage, but I did scrounge up a few REBOR contemporaries to show alongside it. First up we have the Ceratosaurus Savage, one of their earlier works. This was another stylized sculpt that got REBOR in some hot water back in the day, but call me crazy, I do miss the charm of their more traditionally sculpted figures. There's something about them that feels a bit more realistic than the 3D sculpted offerings, and the paint jobs also felt a bit less artificial on those older models. Next we have one of their Stegosaurus garden figures. I believe this is the mountain variant, and if anyone knows Prehistoric Journey, these two can be paired together for a cool reconstruction of that mount and artwork. As a final REBOR comparison, I'll go ahead and bring in their recent Tyrannosaurus Rex Kiss. And boy, was this a milestone achievement from them. I don't think I've ever seen another figure of theirs get so much positive attention and hype. I'm right there with everyone. This is easily one of the best things they've ever done and shows they can do more naturalistic figures than what we're used to seeing them pump out. And just for something different, here is the Saurophaganax next to Nanmu's Allosaurus. Now, there is some debate as to whether or not Saurophaganax was its own genus or just another species of Allosaurus, Allosaurus maximus to be exact. At the moment, distinctions in the vertebrae are enough to keep it its own thing, although as I understand it, there may be new information from fossil material in New Mexico that will further put this question to bed. Either way, for the time being, I'm glad to have an official Saurophaganax on the shelf, but I'd certainly be interested to see the Battle at Big Rock color scheme of Nanmu's Allosaurus used on the REBOR sculpt. And that was REBOR's Saurophaganax, aka Notorious B.I.G. Overall, it's another cool, stylized sculpt on what I imagine would be a very cool apex predator from a company specializing in cool, stylized sculpts. I will say, I do love how I can always pick out a REBOR sculpt on the shelf. If you put a crowd of figures out, you'd be able to spot a REBOR design from a mile away. True, it might not be at home alongside your more naturalistic models, and the paint schemes all left me a little cold in one way or another, but if you're a fan of REBOR's unique design sensibilities and are wanting another big scary theropod for your shelf, I'm sure this is one to please. As always though, I want to know what you guys think of this figure. Do you own it yet? Are you planning to pick it up? What was your favorite variant, and what color scheme would you have liked to see? Drop a comment down below, and as always, thank you so much for tuning in to today's review. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you again soon for the next one. Until then, take care out there, and bye-bye.